you. And maybe you didn't want that, but here I am. I am the project coordinator for M3I for the Mason Music and Memory Initiative, and I'm here to introduce our guest speaker, Ellen Phipps. She is on our board for our music project, and she has been kind enough to provide her time and talk about just the importance of these personalized activities for individuals with dementia, without dementia, in your daily life as well, inside and outside of nursing facilities. And I just wanted to give her a brief and important introduction, and then I will let her take it away. So Ellen is presently the executive director of Aging Together, but she has many other accolades under her belt. She has been the interim president and CEO of the Alzheimer's Association for the Central and Western Virginia chapter for the past 18 years. She is a published author of the book titled Connections, Engagement in Life for Persons with Dementia, a Complete Activities Guide. She received her Bachelor of Science in Therapeutic Recreation and Master of Science in Gerontology. And from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, where she is also faculty. So before joining the Alzheimer's Association, Ellen served as the director of adult day centers in Charlottesville and Somerset, England, Charlottesville, Virginia. Maybe there's a Charlottesville, England, to be determined. But she is, I mean, an expert in terms of providing creative and innovative approaches to care. And we are so excited that she is here to talk to all of us today about how we can not necessarily improve, but maybe perhaps make adjustments to how we are engaging our residents at our nursing facilities. So thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, I will pass the baton to you, Ellen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Yeah, and I don't know about expert, but you know, I have had a lot of experience, and I've learned a lot from a lot of the residents and participants that I've worked with, for sure, and even my own dad. So as he had Alzheimer's as well. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. Thank you to George Mason, to the Music and Memory, amazing music and memory program that I love. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about a person-centered approach to activities for persons living with dementia. And I hope you'll, interact with me a little bit with questions or ideas that you might have, or things that you have found useful too, because I think we can all learn from each other. But before we start, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, what do we mean by personalized or person-centered? So let's just talk about that for a second. So person-centered care, as I'm sure most of you know this term and you've been aware of it, and it reflects a philosophy of care that's built around the needs of that individual person. And it's contingent upon knowing the person and through an interpersonal relationship. So, it's, I think, establishing that relationship. And if we think about it, I just think just really in life in general, I mean, children do better when they have relationship with their teachers, right? I mean, people just do better when they understand each other and they know each other a little bit. And that's the same with person-centered care in dementia care. So a person-centered philosophy challenges those traditional medical models of care. Those tend to be more focused on the process and schedules. Breakfast is at 7 o'clock, too bad if you used to get up at, sleep in until 10 and then get your breakfast at 11, breakfast here is at 7 a.m., take it or leave it. I'm not saying places do that, but, certainly in the old days, in my time, I saw a lot of that. I think we're really changing that model a bit. And so, of course, a person-centered model would be more in tune with a person's preferences and having that flexibility, instead of thinking about what the organizational needs are, or even, you know, what the staff needs are. I do think it's important to take staff needs into consideration, because a happy staff usually means happy residents. So a person-centered philosophy requires a commitment from everyone, and it really has to come from the top as well, from the leadership of the organization. You might see it as person-directed or resident-focused or something similar to that, but the core principles are essentially the same. So, you know, there are over 5 million persons living with dementia in the United States. And if you know 10 people living with dementia, you know 10 individuals living with dementia. No two people are the same. Just as every person is unique, every person living with dementia is unique as well. And I think it's really important for us to remember that, because we do tend to do that sort of grouping of, oh, they like this, or they don't like that, or they do this with sundowning, or they do that when they're in this stage. So we're going to talk a little bit about the stages and some things to expect through the stages. But I do think in person-centered philosophy, we really want to focus on, we want to remember that each person is a unique individual. So what are some of the values in a person-centered philosophy? It's important to respect the person at all times and treat them with dignity. Meeting them where they are. We're going to talk a lot about that today, especially through the stages of the disease process. How do you continue to meet the person where they are? We have the saying, you know, join them in their world rather than trying to get them to join us in our world. So trying, you know, staying away from sort of that reality. Oh, what do you mean? You think it's winter? It's actually spring now. And avoid correcting them, but really meeting them where they are. We're going to, a person-centered philosophy focuses on activities that are built on the person's strengths rather than focusing on their deficits. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. And the ultimate idea there is to encourage independence. So what we'll find is, with a few different, maybe with a little bit of support, a few cues, a person really can be independent in the activity. The environment is really critical in a person-centered care philosophy. So thinking about background noise, overhead loudspeakers, which can be very disorienting and distracting. Staff listening to their own music or radio shows or TV can be very distracting. So setting the environment that's conducive to calm and engagement is going to be important. Promoting a sense of usefulness, right? We all like to feel like we're productive and that we're contributing to our society in some way. And that's the same for people who are living with dementia. And a person-centered philosophy in terms of activities should be fun. They should be enjoyable. That's why we do them. It shouldn't be painful or forced on anybody. And then the importance of validating a person's feelings. So if they are upset about something, you know, just to validate, oh, I see that something has really upset you right now, instead of, you know, not acknowledging how the person might be feeling. So the first step in the person-centered approach is, as we talked about before, that relationship, getting to know the person. I'm going to share with you some tools today, and the tools come from the Connections activity book that Shannon was talking about, but there are many tools out there. It doesn't have to be from the Connections book. That's my baby, so that's something that I rely on heavily. But you can, you know, there, like I said, there are a lot of great tools out there for the types of tools that I'm going to share with you today. So the first tool here is the conversation starter. And this can be used as just a prompt to help you get started. And then you might have write a little summary about the person. If you work in a facility, you think about one of the residents that maybe you know quite well, and think about, how you might be able to summarize a little bit about who they are, where they were born. Did they grow up on a farm perhaps, or did they grow up in a city? What kind of family background did they have? Uh, what were school days like when they went to school? Did they have to walk miles and miles, or were they homeschooled? Or, that can be kind of interesting to compare that with how school is like today. Not to even mention the pandemic. We won't go there. Okay. Um, that changed everything. Okay. What I think it's important to know their education level. So, did they have a PhD? Did they have a master's degree? Did they even, perhaps maybe they didn't graduate high school? So it's important to know that when you're planning activities for the person. Had they been married? Did they have children? Did they have grandchildren? What was their occupation? And what hobbies did they have? What did they really love to do? And it's also going to be important to understand any cultural or religious background, because that might really influence the types of activities that they engage in. So if there's some sort of special things to consider, depending on a cultural or religious belief or belief system. So we're going to visit today with Dr. Dave. Okay, so Dr. Dave loved to go to Maggiano's. That was one of his favorite outings. Dr. Dave, in this picture, was in the early stages of dementia, but we're going to follow him today through the stages of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of a summary, what we learned through talking directly to Dr. Dave and also with his family, a little bit about him. So he was born and raised in Brooklyn, and he grew up close to Ebbets Field, which was a baseball field, and it was home to the Brooklyn Dodgers many years ago, before they flew off in the night to California. Apparently, that's how the story goes. I'm not really much of a sports fan, but he spent his days as a child hanging around Ebbets Field, and the neighborhood kids, they were always allowed to go in and watch the baseball games at the ninth inning. And Dr. Dave was really, really smart. He did really well in school, and he took trombone lessons from a well-known jazz musician. He graduated high school at the age of 16, and he left Brooklyn to attend a college far away. And eventually he attended Harvard Medical School, and he became a family doctor. And he also served in the military. He was married for many years, and they raised 4 children, and they traveled the world. And he always loved to paint. And in fact, he really hoped to attend high school for the arts in New York, but he was turned down. And so even though he became a doctor, his first love, he had hoped really, was to be an artist. That was really his first love. He spent all of his very limited free time painting. He also liked to swim. So again, think about how you might describe yourself, or what you might tell somebody else about yourself, or think about one of the residents or a couple of the residents that you work with, and how you might, summarize them and how well do you know them. And as you can see, you can learn a lot about a person in about a minute or two. It doesn't take a lot of time. So the next tool I'm going to share with you from the Connections program is the Leisure Interest Survey. And this is just like a checklist. And it's a way that you can discover the leisure interest of the individual, past and present interest. And so in the early and middle stages of the disease, activities are going to be most successful when they reflect the interest of the individual. But in the later stages of the disease, their past hobbies and interests are going to be less important, and we're going to focus more on the senses. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But consider some of your own favorite activities. Maybe you like to hike or play golf or watch sports or watch TV. But then think too about something that you really don't like to do. Like for me, I don't really like to do puzzles. And think what it might feel like if somebody really tried hard to persuade you to do something that you really had no interest in. You might get a little agitated. I would start to get agitated if somebody was really trying to persuade me to do a puzzle. I'd be like, no, I don't think so. And if they kept persisting, I might get very agitated because I don't want to do a puzzle. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind. So if you look at this checklist, the little, this is just a part of a very like 4 pages of different activities listed in alphabetical order. So every activity you can think of from A to Z, and there's the ability to add activities in if they're missing from the checklist. And then the NI at the top of the page means they've never been interested in that activity. So, you know, if they were never interested in that, we're probably not going to go with one of those activities to begin with. The I means that they've had an interest in that activity at some point in their life, but it's maybe fallen off their radar now. So anything in the I column might be a good one to try to reintroduce to a person. And then the last column, the C column, that represents activities that they've been interested in and they can complete. The C represents complete. They can complete them independently. So again, if they're already doing it, you know, you may not need to worry about that. They're already picking up their paints and painting, and they're self-initiating. With Dr. Dave, the computer was something that he had been interested in, but as the disease progressed, he was less able to initiate that activity. So with a little bit of prompting, setting up the computer and finding some art slideshows to watch on the computer with a little bit of help, that could be an activity that could work. So again, this is a very small sampling of an extensive list of many, many different activities to choose from. And it's really great. Again, you know, sometimes when you're working with a resident, you might not be able to think of all the different activities that are out there. So for example, you might say, well, what did you like to do? Oh, I can't really remember what I used to like to do. Well, did you like to polish shoes? Oh yeah, I used to love to polish shoes. Yeah, I forgot about that. So again, this is a tool that can be used as a prompt because let's face it, it's hard for maybe the person to remember, and it's hard for us to remember all the different kinds of activities that might be out there. So the next tool is the cognitive checklist. And so there's 3 tools. I'm not going to keep going on with 1,000 tools today. There's really 3 tools. This is the 3rd one. And the cognitive checklist is divided into early stage, middle stage, and late stage. And it will address the person's medical status, their mobility status. Are they in a wheelchair? Can they walk independently? What's their vision like? So here's a sample of what that looks like. Again, it's kind of cut off. It's just a sampling. But we're looking at things like, can they prepare their own meal? Are they able to dress themselves? You know, those activities of daily living that we talk about. Can they toilet independently? Are they able to keep track of those important objects like the hearing aids and the dentures, or are those things easily misplaced? Can they read? Are they able to understand or if you read to them, can they understand what you're reading to them? How much do they understand of a conversation? Do they know where they are? What's their attention span like? So this is not a formal assessment, and I want to stress that. There are a lot of assessment tools out there. This is not a formal assessment, and it's not an evidence-based assessment tool. It's just really a checklist, just to give you an idea of the approximate cognitive level that the person is in. So are they in the early stages? Do we think they're probably in the middle stages, or do we think they're in the later stages? Because the stage that they're in is really going to impact the type of activity that we are able to do with them. Okay. So I want to talk next about, well, you know what? I actually, I want to stop there for a second. I think this is maybe a good time to just stop and just ask if anybody does have any questions about anything that I've covered so far. And Shannon, if there's anything in the chat, I can't see the chat.
Nothing in the chat right now, but yeah, at any point, if you guys have any questions, you can drop it in the chat. You can unmute yourself and just say, hey,
Yeah.
do the raised hand function, however, but yeah, so if anybody has any questions now is a good time. I definitely really liked especially the first tool. I mean, I was just even thinking like when I moved across the country and I was like trying to meet people, I should have had that checklist with me to just be like, hi,
Here's
who
some
are you?
conversation starters. Well, you know, and it's funny you should say that, Shannon. I had lunch with one of my board members yesterday, and she's actually serves as an advisor to the Aging Together board, and she'd been helping me for several months and serving as a mentor, and I didn't really know her that well, and you know, I took her to lunch to say thank you, and I learned so much about her just in that luncheon, and I just feel like I just have so much more of an appreciation for her, who she is, and some of the things she's been through. So it was really valuable. But I want to talk next about focusing on strengths, because in a person-centered approach to care and approach to programming, it's, as I said before, it's easy for us with dementia, when dementia or Alzheimer's or other types of dementia are involved, to focus on those things that a person can no longer do. But what I want to flip that coin a little bit and highlight the things that people can still do. So maybe you are familiar, some of you, with the Riceburg scale, which talks about the 7 stages of dementia. And it was developed many years ago, I think back in the 80s or 90s. And, you know, I think it's very important. What that Riceburg scale does is it looks at common symptoms and how the disease progresses through the stages. And I do think it's important to have an idea about how the disease progresses and what to expect as a disease progresses. But again, with person-centered programming, what we want to focus on is what a person can still do. So let's just take a look at on the left-hand part of the screen, you'll see those common symptoms listed from the Riceburg scale. I'm sorry, I should actually have credited that there. So in the early stage, for example, in the Riceburg scale, you'll see problems coming up with the right words. A person might have trouble remembering people's names. They may have trouble performing a familiar task like cooking, like maybe they really like to cook, but now they're forgetting half of the ingredients of a favorite recipe. They read something and then they might forget what they just read. They might experience trouble planning or organizing. They might forget recent events, and they just went to a party yesterday, and then maybe they have very little remembrance of that. And sometimes you can see mood changes. So those are some of the common symptoms that that some people can experience. Again, if you know one person with dementia, that's just one person, and the symptoms can be very different and wide ranging. But focusing on strengths, we'd want to sort of take a look at, well, what is somebody in the early stages still able to do? Well, usually they're able to express themselves verbally in the early stages. They often are able to converse intellectually. They can understand spoken language. Sometimes people in the very early stages are still working, so they can be, obviously very highly functioning. They can advocate for themselves, tell you what they like, what they don't like. So we should be absolutely asking for their input and their opinions at this point. They can use memory strategies such as maybe labeling cabinets and able to help them in their room, or if they're at home, likely in the early stages they're at home, maybe labeling the kitchen cupboards so they can help remember where things are. Their long-term memory is usually intact. And if they've been very comfortable using technology in the early stages, they can usually still use technology quite appropriately. In the middle stages, you're going to see people oftentimes at this stage, they might have trouble recalling information about themselves, their address or the telephone number. They may get confused with date and time, might be wearing shorts when it's very, very cold outside, or putting on a sweater when it's very hot outside. They may not really remember things, or even where they are. They can get confused about where they are, remember what they did even a little while ago. You can see changes in sleep patterns, and sometimes people can wander or become lost as well. And I know you've all seen that. But if we take a look at the strengths, common strengths, and in the middle stages, let's flip that coin a little bit. And oftentimes people, they still, in the middle stages, do you like orange juice? No, get that away from me. I mean, they can still let you know what they like and what they don't like often. And there's usually some level of engagement in the conversation, although that might be changing, and it might not be as clear as before, and they may not be able to understand everything in a conversation, but they can certainly get the gist of some things. Visual awareness might be quite good. They can still write. They might be able to read some words. I know my dad, for example, with his dementia, with Alzheimer's, he was able to read some words very far into the disease process. It was quite astonishing. They can enjoy physical activity, and I think it's also important to remember that they can get pleasure from activity. And of course, songs and music, as we all know, the power of music and songs, and that can work really well throughout all the stages. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And even in late stage dementia, when a person is having trouble controlling their bowel and bladder, and there are significant personality changes, and it's just getting harder and harder for them to be engaged and to respond to their environment. They might need total assistance with all of the activities of daily living, but there are still some strengths there. Even in the very late stages, they might be aware of the presence of others. They may respond to touch. Again, they might be able to hear and respond to music, and we've all seen how powerful music can be in the late stages of dementia. They may be communicating through facial expression, and they can still get pleasure from an activity such as listening to music or other activities as well. So if we were to bring it all together and think about Dr. Dave, the retired physician, we're going to take a look at what a comprehensive summary looks like when we've used all of those tools that I just talked about. We've got their background, their personality. We know a little bit about them. We know their interests now and their hobbies because we used that leisure interest survey. We know about what level of functioning they're at because we looked at that cognitive checklist. We know a little bit about their religion and their cultural preferences, and we might have some other important information too about vision and hearing. So Dr. Dave is a resident of an assisted living facility. He's 85-year-old white male of the Jewish faith. He was born in Brooklyn, one of 3 sons. He has an excellent relationship with his 4 children and 9 grandchildren, though only one of them lives nearby him right now. His wife of nearly 60 years died just a few years ago, and that was very hard for him. He always enjoyed going for walks, discussing politics. As a child, he played the trombone, and we learned that his music teacher was actually a well-known jazz musician. He enjoys the music of the 1920s and 30s, so that's important for us to remember. He's a retired family physician, and he loves to talk about his work. His life was very full of early morning meetings, taking care of patients, making house calls back in the day. And he's also very used to being in charge. So he's going to like to feel like he's still in charge and in control of his life. He spends a lot of his free time now painting. He also sleeps during the day, and he complains about feeling bored. He's never, ever enjoyed group activities, and he refuses to attend the activity groups at the facility. So that's important to know about him. He's in the middle stages, sort of early middle stages of Alzheimer's disease, and he needs a lot of cueing and prompting, but he's able to engage in conversation. Some of the details get a little fuzzy. And his vision and his hearing are good. So that's important to know when we're planning activities. And he has really good manual dexterity, and he's got pretty good mobility, and he can still read. So once we've got that much information about a person, we can think about selecting one or two activities based on all of that information, maybe something that we got from that leisure interest survey. And then we can see how we may adapt those activities through the stages. So in most cases, in the early stage, when we're approaching activities with a person-centered approach and a person-centered care approach, we want to ask permission in the early stages. It's okay to ask open-ended questions in the early stages, such as, oh, tell me again, where did you grow up? Or, oh, tell me again, who was your music teacher again, the one that was kind of famous? If you're making adaptations to make things easier for the person, you want to be really tactful about it, not highlighting that the person needs help or needs reminding, because they might be offended. You can use notes and reminders in the early stages as appropriate. You might play a game like Scrabble without rules and just sort of say, oh, let's see if we can make some words together, if the rules are going to make it too challenging. And you can discuss memory strategies together, like, well, would you find it helpful if we labeled some of the cupboards in here? Or would it be easier for you if we put your paints in a plastic box so you could just see them easily when there's nobody here? You'll just remind yourself that you have your paints right there. So for Dr. Dave, now remember, he's now in the middle stages, but when he was in the early stages, he was self-initiating painting, and he was really enjoying that. And he loved to go out to eat. He always liked to be in control. So he liked to choose the restaurant that he would eat at. He used to love to go to art museums, and he would also like to go and visit his wife's gravesite. He used the computer. Sometimes he needed a little bit of help, but he would check email, talk to family on the telephone, enjoyed family gatherings. He loved listening to Miff Mole, who was a jazz musician, who was his music teacher when he was a young boy. And he was able to find that on YouTube. And he would sometimes occasionally like to listen to the news, and he loved to talk about his life. So it didn't really matter how many times you asked him about, so what was it like growing up in Brooklyn? Or tell me again about Ebbets Field. He would talk about those things till the cows came home, and he really enjoyed that. So you couldn't get too much of that. So visiting museums, some of his paintings here. He was quite a prolific painter. He enjoyed family outings. And here's an example of how you might offer a visual prompt during for a daily chore. So maybe if you said to somebody, do you want to go ahead and make a sandwich? And all the ingredients are in the cupboard or in the refrigerator, it might be hard for them to think about where to begin. But with the visual cue of putting those things on the counter, it might be much easier for the person to self-initiate. So there's an example of providing some visual cues and some prompts to enable the person to be as independent as possible. What I mean is, if they don't see the prompts and they're having trouble initiating the activity, sometimes it can be very common for us to think, oh, this is too difficult. You don't know how to make a sandwich anymore. Let me just make it for you. But if we put out the prompts and offer those cues, we might just find that they can actually do it by themselves. So that's an example of encouraging independence with just a subtle cue and a visual cue. All right, so in the middle stages, some of our approach with activities, we always want to approach a person from the front so as not to startle them. And we want to think about breaking tasks down into smaller steps. So even with brushing your teeth or making a sandwich, if you were to stop and think about all the steps involved in an activity like that, there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of steps to making a sandwich. For example, you walk to the fridge, you open the door, you look for the mayonnaise, you take it out, you put it on the counter, and so on and so forth. If we can break the tasks down, then it makes it much easier for a person to be able to accomplish some tasks independently. So we talked about prompts and physical cues. You want to be aware of body language, of your body language and of theirs. For example, is the person getting tense if you're getting too close into their space? So you want to back up if that's the case. You can offer guided choices. Again, open-ended questions don't work so well in the middle stage. So rather than what do you want what would you like to drink? You might say, would you like juice or would you like milk? And offering a choice. And that might help the person. Validating feelings, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Reminiscing, so person might have a lot of trouble engaging right in the present moment, but if they start talking about their childhood, they might have endless stories to tell. If a person is becoming agitated, diversion can usually work wonders. So if they really want to get outside and it's not possible for them to go out, you might offer a diversion like, well, let's have some ice cream and listen to this music before we go out. Maybe we can go out later. So diversion can really work wonders. And of course, music can always work. Hey, let's listen to that Miff Mole and maybe we can dance a little bit before we go outside. So for Dr. Dave in the middle stages, we could say to him, would you like to paint or go for a walk? And he would be quite clear about that. But if you said, what do you want to do right now? He might just shrug his shoulders. Should we go to Maggiano's, knowing that that's his favorite restaurant, but now we're providing that cue for him. Going to the art museum was still enjoyable, and visiting his wife's gravesite was still something he wanted to do. Computer activities, viewing art and listening to music was something he still really enjoyed. Communicating with family and working with the otoscope, and we're going to take a look at that in a minute. That's an instrument that doctors use to examine the ear, and that was something that he loved to do because it really made him remember his days of being a doctor. So an example of an art activity that he used to enjoy, even in the middle stages, was just, what do you like about this painting? And where do you think that path might be leading? Or what do you think about the colors? And so there's no wrong answers here. So it's just a way to engage in viewing art. And with somebody who was as into art as he was, you could even say, who do you think might have painted this painting? We were able to make a personal memory book with Ebbets Field, which is here to the left on the cover, and his memories. So he dictated some of his memories as I typed them in very large print. And so, for example, we ended up with a 20-page booklet that was all about his childhood memories, about 1 or 2 sentences on each page in very large print. My name is Dr. Dave. I grew up in Brooklyn. I used to love to go to Ebbets Field. And he was able to read that book himself, and he would read it over and over again because it was all about him. And he was able to do that way through almost to the end stages, actually, of Alzheimer's disease. It was really quite incredible. Here's Myth Mole and his band, the Molars. Here's activities such as walking outdoors. And his mobility definitely declined throughout the stages. Here's an example of Dr. Dave working with that otoscope. So it was like a puzzle for him, and he would enjoy taking it apart and putting it together. And it was pretty fascinating. And one day I said, "Oh, are you going to examine my ear now?" And he was, he was clearly in the middle stages of dementia. And he said, "No." And I said, "Oh, you don't want to examine my ear? Why not?" And he said, "It hasn't been sterilized." So it was quite amazing that even with that advanced dementia, he hung on to that doctor thing about hygiene and being sterilized, having the equipment sterilized. But that was an activity that he enjoyed, and he would work at that for hours. In the late stages, again, approaching the person from the front, using eye contact, slow movement so as not to startle a person. Music can still work wonders, now especially. And now in the later stages, it's going to be less about language, not so much talking now. It's more just being with the person and providing stimulation through the senses. The previous occupation, the previous hobbies become less important, and it's just about comfort and pleasure in the moment. So possibly painting, if that's possible still, for Dr. Dave in the later stages, visiting the art museum and going to the grave site, not really interested anymore. Music and memory program, he engaged in that in his facility, but he didn't like having the headphones on his ears. He didn't like that feeling. So for him, listening to the music was through the computer or through an old-fashioned CD player, and that's how he used to enjoy listening. He still loved to have his family around. So once a prolific artist, he was now painting in the lines, but he still got a lot of pleasure out of that because the activity was able to be adapted. When walking became more and more difficult, he was able to do some exercise in his facility. And viewing art on the computer was something he really, really enjoyed and got a lot of, he was really engaged in that, even in the later stages. He loved patriotic songs, and he loved singing and listening to patriotic songs. So I'm going to back up a minute. So this gives you an idea of how to adapt the activities through the stages. And when we talk about person-centered care, this means that we're meeting the person where they at, even as the disease progresses. We're not having expectations of what they were and what they were able to do when they were in the early stages. That's changed now. So we need to meet them where they're at throughout the disease process. And so thinking about the person as a whole person, another way to think about offering different types of activities is to think about the activity domains. So when you're planning activities programs for a person and you're thinking about being person-centered and thinking about the whole person as an individual, thinking about the different aspects of activities. So what types of activities there are? So we have creative activities. We talked a lot about art and music, but there are also, think about the activities, the things that we do for fun, just for pure enjoyment, whether it's involving watching a game on TV or playing a game of baseball. So you can be an active participant in a leisure activity or a passive participant. If you think about the work that made us feel like we're valued members of society, but even work-related chores that we might enjoy doing, like washing the dishes or polishing shoes or sweeping, things like that. And then we have physical activities or exercise. And then we have self-care activities such as grooming or exercise as well could go in there. Brushing someone's hair, manicures, things like that. Intergenerational activities that involve young children with older adults, and sensory activities, and then of course spiritual activities, whether that's yoga, meditation, Bible study, whatever is meaningful for that person. So this just gives you an idea of some of the different aspects of a well-rounded program, looking at the different domains of activities that we talk about. I'd like to share a very, very brief video clip about a person-centered art-making activity.
Through art, you get a chance to really relate to each person as an individual, not as an individual with Alzheimer's. And it gives me the opportunity to see that even though one does struggle with an illness such as Alzheimer's, there is still a person in there, and they deserve that same respect and chance to explore that everyone else does.
Very proud of the artwork that she did. Music can also be used with movement. So sometimes listening to music and painting along. Another group that we did, some of the quotes from this particular group was, the whole group appeared to really enjoy the music. Joan was dancing in her chair and her brush strokes went along with the beat. Alice was singing throughout the entire session. Another woman who did not paint was very engaged with the music and watching the other people paint. And she pointed to one painting and said, "I love her painting. I want to take that home and hang it up in my house." Here's an example of a Montessori, the Montessori approach for use with persons living with dementia. And it's tracing shells. Can be a very fun sensory activity. And with art, sometimes using photographs to inspire a drawing. I'd like to share a very quick video clip of another type of music where the participants are actually actively engaged in making music and creating a song together. Anybody recognize that song? It was Amazing Grace.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We only got a snippet of it. Having a toolbox for somebody who really enjoyed, a fishing box for somebody who enjoyed fishing, looking through the tackle box. There's the word I was looking for, the tackle box. Adapting, thinking about the leisure aspect and adapting card games when a complicated game is too challenging. Maybe just sorting the cards, matching can be a fun activity. You can even do that with Scrabble. So you can make a word, like the word great, and then you can look for the tiles to match. to create the word. Here's an example of polishing and shoe shining. These would be considered work-related or chores. And here's a picture of an adult day center having an intergenerational movement activity, which was great fun. Sensory aprons can be used in the later stages for people, again, just to fidget with and stimulating the senses of touch. Reminiscing is always great, rather than quizzing the person. If they might have trouble remembering people's names, so you don't want to necessarily say, who's this? But you can say, isn't she lovely? Or what do you think about this? Or it looks like they're having a great time. I want to just take a moment to talk about doll therapy, because I think it's important to remember that we don't want activities to be childish or demeaning in any way. But as the disease progresses, sometimes it does become very appropriate in the later stages. It can be very helpful to people to feel like they're caring for somebody. And if you've ever seen a person in the very late stages of Alzheimer's disease caring for a very lifelike type of baby doll, it can be really quite rewarding. It can make them feel like they're really helping and contributing and being productive. I want to stress here, though, that it really depends on where the person is at in the disease process and if it's going to really be beneficial for them, because the last thing we want to do is assume that a person might like a baby doll when in fact they might be completely offended by the suggestion. So that, again, it's why it's important to know the level of cognition that they're at, where they're at, and their past leisure interests. If they didn't have children and never really liked being around children, it's probably not going to be an appropriate activity for them. Sorting using different materials just to kind of match can be another fun activity. And of course, through the pandemic, people had to get very creative. So here's some engagement in group activity while still remaining safe. This is hallway bingo in one facility. Here's a physically distanced outdoor group. Here's tic-tac-toe at the window, which is one of my personal favorites. So to kind of wrap up everything that we talked about today, we want to create a positive environment. Activities might need to be simplified, but they shouldn't be childish. We want to remove clutter, make the environment as positive and as calming as possible without background noise. You want to focus on the process of painting or creating rather than a finished product. So it's not about having a perfect painting or even having a painting that looks like anything in particular. It's about the process of doing it. You don't want to hover over a person and make them feel like they're being rushed. Remember breaking down directions into simple step-by-step tasks, breaking down the tasks into simple steps. You want to remember to communicate visually as well as verbally with the activities, and not be judgmental and trying not to be too directive, but allowing the person to have as much control as possible and for them to really feel like they are in control of what they're doing. And praise really works wonders. As much praise. We all can benefit from praise. I don't care how old we are. We can all benefit from praise as opposed to criticism. And, you know, collaboration is great, doing things together. And I don't think I can say enough. We are all unique individuals and we all have our own unique preferences and our own backgrounds and our own histories. And that concludes my presentation, but I would love to hear from all of you. I hope we have time for a couple of questions or comments or stories for you to share.
Yeah, for sure. If anybody has any, if you need to jump off, feel free to jump off. But we're gonna stay for a little bit just to see if we have any questions. So feel free to unmute and yeah. And thank you so much, Ellen. I learned so much.
Thank you.
I was wondering, kind of with like the baby doll example, would like pets serve a similar role, or are those usually helpful?
Yes. Absolutely. Pets are great and pet therapy is fantastic. But again, you know, for people who love pets, but sometimes you'll come across somebody who is afraid of animals or doesn't want to touch. And so it's just about knowing the person, which is really so critical. But the other thing that's being used, and I'm glad you brought this up, Angelina, this other thing that's being used so much now with a lot of success are these robotic pets. So it's something that's easy to have in a facility for people with advanced dementia. And it's, again, it's like the same principle as the baby dolls. So they look very real, and they can be really comforting to a person with dementia. So great point. And thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for your feedback, Mary Kay. Any other questions? I would just from my perspective as a psychologist, in comparison to someone in this field, it sounds like the time that you take to gather all this information about a person really pays off. Through the entire process, whether it's dementia or anything, just taking that thorough evaluation of their background and getting to know them. I mean, that just gives you so many tools for so many instances.
I think that is so critical because, you know, if you think about it, like you're saying, you know, when you're trying to meet people, you know, we can all relate to that party where we were at, where everybody was maybe into a certain kind of music or dance, and we didn't feel like we fit in at all because it really wasn't to our liking, and how uncomfortable that can make you feel. And so it's, yeah, I think that's really critical, is understanding who the person is to make that connection with them.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. We'll stay on for just a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. If you have specific questions for Ellen, I can be sure to connect you guys together. And I think Ellen mentioned that she would be okay to share some of her presentation.
So I'll share the slides as a PDF. So I'll get those to you.
Yeah, it's just kind of having a handy little reference sheet there, and I'll email that out on our reminder of upcoming webinar information. So similar to what I did with Denise's information. So thanks everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you so much, Ellen. This was amazing. We really appreciate it.
That was really fun. I love to talk about activities, and have a great weekend. Hopefully the weather's going to stay like this. It's wonderful.
Yes. Nice.
All right.
And summery. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.